Now, Shaiel Ben-Ephraim is the host of the Israel-Palestine Report, and I've been following on social media his work over the last period, and I'm very glad to welcome him onto the mother of all talk shows. Shaiel, thanks for joining us. My first question is the one I asked Judge Napolitano. What do you think Netanyahu spent all that time in the White House discussing? What's going on? Is it something bad for Netanyahu, as some on the pro-Trump wing call it, or is it good news for Netanyahu and therefore bad news for the rest of the world?
Yeah, so I don't know how to answer that. Generally, it's good news for Netanyahu because it looks like, despite the fact that Netanyahu has been under a lot of pressure in the last few days, and if you ask what they're talking about, according to all reports, the focus of all those talks was the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. He wanted to talk about Iran, he wanted to talk about other things, but the focus kept returning to Gaza. And there was an attempt to make him cave on all of his positions, including aid. He wanted the GHF to continue to give out aid, and on that he caved. But he managed to retain two things that are important to him. One is not to give any guarantee that he's going to end the war. I wish there was never that much pressure to begin with. And the other was the Morag line, which is the second line after the Philadelphia line. So if the Philadelphia line is the line of the border between Egypt and Gaza, the Morag line is a parallel line to it. And Netanyahu has been insisting on keeping it for two reasons. Reason one, he wants to sabotage the deal. But reason two, if the deal is not sabotaged, he wants to be able to keep that so that he can build the concentration camp that he's planning on building in southern Gaza beneath that line. After a lot of pressure, according to the latest report from Barak Ravid just an hour ago, they agreed to redeploy the troops in the Morag line somewhat backwards, but keep the Morag line. Why is that good news for Netanyahu? It's good news for Netanyahu because it means that there's likely not going to be a deal. It means he's likely going to be able to keep his coalition. And even if there is a deal, he'll be able to continue with his ethnic cleansing plan and restart the war in 60 days after having gained a few hostages. So unfortunately, the answer is this is pretty good news for Netanyahu. It definitely could have been worse. His nightmare was that Trump says, I'll have an open break with you, including, mean tweets and possible sanctions and whatever, if you don't withdraw. And that didn't happen. It doesn't look like that will happen.
So going back to this Morag line then, and you used the word, and it's absolutely correct, the word you used, they intend on a concentration camp. In fact, some of the torture of the English language in some of the headlines in US and British newspapers has been a wonder to behold. They say that they are going to concentrate the Palestinians in Rafah, but they can't bring themselves to use the word camp, but there will be no appreciable difference. They're making a tiny ghetto for 2 million people, presumably as a prelude to kicking them out altogether when they get the green light for that. What do you say?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. First of all, anyone who says it's not a concentration camp, all you need to do is look at the statement that Israel Katz made. He said that they're going to concentrate everyone in this camp. He just didn't use those words adjacently. He used separate sentences in the same statement. So he's saying it, and there's just no question about that. And of course, there's going to be people who are in the camp, and there's going to be people who are out of the camp. There's going to be people who won't come in, even if they promise them food, even if they try to threaten them in, there will be people who stay out. The people who stay out will all be considered terrorists by the IDF, right? Women, children, whoever's kept out will likely be considered terrorists. Not that different from what's happening now already in areas that were supposed to be evacuated by the population. So the genocide will be even more blatant in this area in the north. And in the south, they're going to try to get the people to leave. The main obstacle to having the people leave, the obstacle they keep running in, is that no one wants to cooperate. The security risks of taking in people from Gaza, some of whom do indeed have ties to terror organizations, but also the PR of helping Israel with ethnic cleansing and genocide is too much for any country to bear so far. And even very poor countries that have been offered a good incentive, like Somaliland, like Libya, have, after thinking about it so far, said no. So, yeah, the point is to gather them there and clear them out. There's a good chance that won't happen because of logistical issues. Also, another report I've seen is saying that Trump, from Chaim Levinson in Haaretz, that Trump has lost interest in the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. He tried it. He saw that there was a lot of opposition from Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and he's lost interest. So Israel wants to do this. I'm not sure they'll be able to do this, but that's indeed the plan.
I'm glad you made that segue to Qatar and Saudi Arabia because, as I think we know, I think it's a commonplace, Trump loves money and shiny things, especially gold and diamonds and so on. And these places in the Gulf, they've got far more money to give. Never mind Miriam Adelson giving $100 million. The sheikhs of Qatar gave him a floating palace as a new Air Force One. And he came away with hundreds of billions in his chest. In a way, these rich Arab countries are buying Donald Trump's loyalty away from Netanyahu, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a perfect world for Trump, he would be able to satisfy Qatar, the pro-Israel wing of his party, Adelson, and the isolationist wing of his party at the same time, and enjoy all those benefits. He doesn't want to turn his back on Israel because there's a lot of political benefits to supporting Israel. But if he's forced to choose, at this point, I don't think he's going to choose Israel. I think that the amount of money, as you said, that Qatar, Saudi Arabia have to offer is very compelling. And if they were to force him to choose between them and Israel, he would probably end up choosing them if they did it in a sophisticated enough way. And one of the major reasons for that is not only the money, but also he has people in his administration who would help him do that. People like J.D. Vance, people like Pete Hegseth, they generally support this. They're also enthralled by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and they don't want the United States to be too involved in foreign entanglements. But what Trump is going to try to do, I wouldn't take this too far, is try to square the circle. Try to find a way to make Israel make enough concessions so that Qatar and Saudi Arabia aren't against them, and so on and so forth. And by the way, there's nothing that revolutionary about that. You know, I wrote my dissertation about U.S. policy towards Israel in the 70s and in the 80s. And at that time, all they were trying to do is find a way to harmonize what they were trying to do with Jordan, what they're trying to do with Egypt, they're trying to do with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, to take away whatever irritant there was to the relationship and square that particular circle. So even though Trump is more corrupt maybe than your, not Nixon, but your Fords, your Carters, your Reagans, the dilemma he finds himself in is not a new one. And the Americans have ways of doing this. And remember that Qatar and Saudi Arabia don't consider Israel to be an enemy. They were closer to Israel in the past, and they're very upset at the genocide, but they share security interests vis-a-vis extreme Wahhabists, vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis all sorts of other threats. So everyone has a general interest in getting along. And that's why I don't think he'll be forced to choose. But if he has to choose, I don't think he's choosing Israel.
Meanwhile, the war drags on. Headless children still being carried out of the rubble. But the IDF suffered quite substantial harm, damage, death just this week in Beit Hanun. What's the current state of morale amongst the conscripts of the IDF, would you say?
Yeah, the IDF morale has never been lower. It's in truly bad state, and the reasons for that are varied. I'll give you all the reasons. The reason number one is not anything to do with genocide or killing Palestinians. The truth is, sadly, most Israelis don't really care. But that is a reason for some people. Some people have done horrible things and don't want to go back because they don't want to do it again. I saw an Israeli soldier talk on Sky News about the things that he did. I've talked to some soldiers myself who never want to go in because of the things that they did. They exist. They're a minority. The most important thing I keep hearing from people who are in there is fatigue. They keep going in and going in and going in again, and they go to the same places, and then they go to the same place, and their friend died here, and then in Bet Hanun, and 8 months later, their friend dies in Bet Hanun again, and they feel like the first friend died for nothing, and the second friend is probably dying for nothing. That's very important. Another thing is that the law to exempt Haredi men that the government is trying to pass is very much undermining morale. The sense that they keep going in over and over again, and the reservists are losing their jobs, they're losing their businesses, they're losing their marriages, they're coming back with PTSD. And then there's all these people who don't serve. That's massively undermining morale. Then there's a lot of other people in this that believe that the government is fighting this war in order to stay in power, which is absolutely true, and is not trying to get back the hostages, and is not trying to defeat Hamas. And that's probably the majority view in Israel right now. Not probably, definitely. And they're not motivated for that reason. And they're also being treated very badly by the army as their mental health deteriorates. A lot of people are going saying, I can't go in anymore. And it's not for ideological reasons. My mental health, I can't go in. And they're being told to go in anyway, or they're being put in jail, and they're committing suicide. So all of these reasons are really lowering morale. The number of people who feel bad about what's happened to the Palestinians is growing. But I think it's the least significant of those reasons so far. Morale is very low. This war or genocide, or it's really both, wars and genocide often go together. And this is one of those cases. Can't go on for much longer without the army collapsing. And the IDF's chief of staff, Zamir, is very aware of that and told the ministers that. So far, they don't seem to care as long as it keeps them in power.
What about the political spectrum? It's little known here, Shaiel, that actually Netanyahu is the more moderate of his current cabinet, that people in that cabinet would qualify for a padded cell in most countries. And that given the state of the political spectrum, the place where the electorate now is, if there was a new election, Netanyahu would probably win it again. Is that your view?
Well, I agree with you that Netanyahu is more moderate than a lot of people in his government. And I think that Netanyahu doesn't have particular bloodlust. I know that's going to be surprising to a lot of people, and doesn't have any particular interest in settling Gaza. But he also has no interest in standing up to the people who do, because he wants to stay in power, and he has no morals and no scruples. So he's not losing sleep over any of this. But yes, Ben Gvir and Smotrich are the ideological core here of what's happening. They're the ones who want ethnic cleansing. They're the ones who want genocide. They're the ones who want settlements, and they're the ones who say that if you ever stop this war, you're not going to have a government. And they make no bones about it, and so Netanyahu goes along with it. I think ideally for him, he'd like to stop the war now, or maybe a couple of weeks ago after the Iran bombing, when he had some achievements to show, and then he can make a case of, look, I saved Israel from this, that, and the other, because he knows that Gaza is going nowhere good. But those guys are keeping him in the government. Now, as for elections, we don't really know what the results of elections would be, because, polls are just a snapshot, so on and so forth. But it looks like Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, is going to run with his own list, and Bennett will be the kingmaker and will be able to form coalition without Netanyahu if he wants to. And that means that either Bennett can go with the so-called left or liberal Zionists, who are not really liberal in any meaningful way. Your Lapids, your Benny Gantz's, possibly Ram, that's a Arab party that goes with Jews into the government, and maybe the Haredi parties. But it could also come to kind of deal with Netanyahu and bring Netanyahu in as a junior partner in his government, which Netanyahu would probably agree to at this point, because he'd be pretty desperate to avoid investigations. Maybe Bennett would say no government investigation, or so on and so forth, in exchange for that. So my guess is Netanyahu won't be the next prime minister. There's too many people who are angry at him for October 7th and for the way he's handled Gaza and the hostages and so on and so forth. But it could be that he's part of the government. And either way, a Naftali Bennett government is not much better than Netanyahu's government
No.
in terms of human rights or how it would treat Palestinians or anything like that. The only difference would be he's less corrupt, Bennett. He's more likely to listen to the United States than Netanyahu. He'll be less beholden to Smotrich and Ben Gvir. So there'll be slight improvement, but not by much. But no, I don't think Netanyahu wins. What Netanyahu's looking at right now, I talked to someone in his staff, and he told me that what Netanyahu is looking at now is to get enough votes for him and his supporters to block a government without him, so that he can force Bennett into bringing him in. And that's possible. That's possible. Winning outright would require 60 something mandates that support him. I think he has about 50. But because the Arabs are excluded from coalitions, not Ram, but the other Arabs, that means there's more room to maneuver for him and he can block a government.